Welcome to the Advaita Channel. I'm Bhagavati, and this evening I'm going to continue reading from Resurrecting Jesus by Adyashanti. And tonight we pick up with part 4, which we're partway through chapter 2 of the book, If Jesus Were Alive Today. But first, I'd like to just play a little prayer from Guruji. Thank you for listening. If anyone's able to give me some feedback about AB, just let me know if the audio is okay. Thank you.
Beloved Father, who dwells within the soul of my being, whose name is I Am. Veneration to your holy name. Thy kingdom is here. Thy will prevails throughout the earth, as it does in the heavenly realms of my soul. You open your hands and satisfy the hunger of all living beings. You heal all hearts of sorrow, so that they in turn may show forgiveness to those whose minds are shrouded in ignorance of the self. Beloved Mother, who imparts to all the sense of choice, so we may finally come to choose you who are truth, and thus find everlasting freedom. Glory to your name, O truth. For yours is the kingdom of existence, of peace and love. All power and glory emanates from you alone, who imparts to all the wisdom, light, love and courage to refer to themselves as I am. Amen. Oh.
If Jesus were alive today. I often wonder what it would be like if Jesus were alive today. Imagine Jesus, who wasn't a Christian, after all, but a Jew, entering a church today, going up to the pulpit and giving a sermon. Can you imagine how challenging that would be for the congregation? Can you imagine how uniquely different that sermon would be from what many of us received in church? In the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly challenges the religious authorities of the day. But ultimately, what he's saying is relevant to all forms of religion. It wouldn't matter if he grew up a Jew, or a Christian, or a Buddhist, or a Hindu, because he is speaking about the structure of religion itself, its hierarchy, its tendency to become corrupted by human beings' desires for power, for influence, for money. Jesus, I think, had a profound understanding that the religion itself, instead of connecting us to the radiance of being, connecting us to that spiritual mystery, could easily become a barrier to divinity. As soon as we get too caught up with the rites and the rituals and the thou shalts and the thou shalt nots of conventional religion, we begin to lose sight of the primary task of religion, which is to orient us towards the mystery of being and to awaken us to what we really are. Of course, these external forms do have a certain usefulness. The social function of religion is to have a moderating influence on egoic impulses and desires, and this moral and ethical role has been very important throughout history. When people move in the world of time and space from a healthy sense of ethics and morals, it's a very positive thing. And religion has an important function in helping control the deeper and darker impulses of the ego. But religion's primary function is not about conveying ethical and moral codes, not about politics and power and hierarchy. Religion's primary function is to awaken within us the experience of the sublime and to connect us with the mystery of existence. As soon as religion forgets about its roots in the eternal, it fails in its central task. Jesus was so critical of the religion of his time because he saw that not only was it not connecting people to the mystery, but that it was actually an active participant in veiling the mystery of experience, of existence, in obscuring the kingdom of heaven. And so he was a critic from the inside. He didn't necessarily reject the religion he was brought up in, but he felt called to challenge it, to transform it. Jesus' keen insight into the potential for the corrupting influence of power in all institutions, whether political, economic, or religious, is very relevant to the modern day. If Jesus existed here and now as a human being, what he'd have to say about these subjects would be as shocking now as it was 2,000 years ago. I've talked to many people over many years that have turned away from Christianity because it seems so often to focus on only the moral and ethical questions, on telling them how to live their lives, but hasn't connected with them in a really deep way. Of course, there are those churches today that are inspired by the real living presence of Christ, but as a whole, Christianity needs new life breathed into it. It needs to be challenged to awaken from the old structures that confine spirit, so that the perennial spirit of awakening can flourish once again. This makes me think of the Christian preacher Rob Bell, founder of a megachurch, Mars Hill. Tens of thousands of people would come to Rob Bell. Very different kind of preacher, very modern, very liberating, very awake. He's here now, he's doing this. And many of the traditionalists, the ones with the rigid structures, regard him to be a heretic. I love heretics, because heretics challenge the status quo. They don't follow the rules, they don't fit in with the structures. They don't just blindly accept and follow. They look for themselves. They take a risk and they take a stand for truth through their own understanding of it, not a taught truth. This is what Christ was doing. It's what Bankai Zenji did in the Zen world. Back in the 1600s. Namaste Nitya. And so give me a heretic any day. Give me a preacher who's not afraid to stand up and speak their own direct understanding, to speak from awareness. And this is the Jesus that we're hearing about now. This may bring a sense of insecurity, but the living presence of the Christ is something that can't be contained within any structure. The spirit that Jesus embodies is not a safe spirit. There's no guarantee of how it will all play out in your life. There's only one guarantee that Jesus gave. If you can receive and awaken and embody what he is speaking about, then your life will never be the same again. Then you will realize that you're already living in the kingdom of heaven. Aren't we just? I feel I'm already living in the kingdom of heaven. My life is already, can never be the same again. Since I met Muji, and now since I met Ananta. Pow. I could say that a lot louder. Pow. Never the same again, and I'm already living in the kingdom of heaven. Hallelujah. How lucky, how blessed. The Jesus story gives us many different images of how spiritual realization can be embodied in the world of time and space. It's important for us to realize that we must not only have the courage to recognize the divinity within ourselves, but also to embody it and to manifest it in the way we live. How can we do that? We have to not try for a start. There's a new video released today by Shumuji on YouTube. I have a hopeless memory these days, so I can't tell you the title, but he was only talking about how we can be in this way. We mustn't be spiritual. I'm spiritual. I'm sure I was very much like that myself until I met Muji. Thank God. I don't want to try to be anything. Not anymore. I don't want to be anything. I want to be nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing. That's just perfect. Be nothing, then there's nothing missing. So it's important for us to realize that we must not only have the courage to recognize the divinity within ourselves, but also to embody it and manifest it in the way we live. We must be true to ourselves, true to the truth. Let us not kid ourselves, let us not pretend, let us not be taken in by our own beliefs and our own habits. Jesus as a living presence is not meek or mild. Jesus was a revolutionary, just for the sake of rebellion. He wanted to break down the lines of separation between people, between heaven and earth, between human and the divine. The events in the Jesus story can be seen as a living metaphor for what's necessary in our own being. The true boundaries that need to be broken down are the boundaries within our own minds and within our own hearts. So the whole Jesus story, ultimately, is the map of a journey that happens within us. It's not about someone else. It's not about this historical character. It's about us. It's a roadmap for us. It's Jesus. In Buddhism, I go on about Buddhism perhaps a little too often. It was 30 years of my life, so. In Buddhism we have a saying, a finger pointing to the moon is not the moon. And this is what our teachers are. They're the finger pointing to the moon. The Buddha was pointing to the moon. Muji, the finger pointing to the moon. Jesus, the finger pointing to the moon. If we become a Christian and nothing else, then we're looking only at the finger and we're missing the moon. But if we follow the finger, we see the moon. The moon can be ours, and the stars, the sun, everything. The kingdom of heaven, here and now. It's an invitation to live out the radiance that's revealed when we have the courage to step beyond anything and everything that separates us. We've come to the end of chapter 2 now, and just like to sit and breathe for a moment before we move into chapter 3. Every chapter in this book is very beautiful. I'm enjoying it very much. And I feel I wish to savour it. Some of the things that Adyashanti is pointing us to in this story of Jesus Christ, in his life and his death, his teachings, and the Gospels that were written about him. Very much living truth, opening doors for many who are reading this book, who are listening, for me. So, chapter 3, the deep truth of myth. And this chapter opens with a very lovely quote from Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton, if you don't know, was a Christian monk. I believe he was a Benedictine, but don't hold me to that. There were Benedictine monks in my own family, so I often feel a very close affinity with Thomas Merton's teachings. He entered an order of silence, wrote a copious number of books and journals, if you look him up. Beautiful to read. Poetry, contemplations. He explored Buddhism, Zen, he took a particular interest in, which again is my crossover with him. Very much caught by Christian mysticism, by the Desert Fathers. Again, you'll find these very strongly in any writings about Christian mysticism. The Desert Fathers, who went out into the Sinai Desert for isolation, to truly contemplate the self. Thomas Merton, truly contemplating the self. He was seeking the same as we all came seeking. And I believe he found. He's unfortunately no longer in the body. So Thomas Merton, life is this simple. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and the divine is shining through it all the time. This is not just a nice story or a fable. It is true. I have to read this again. I apologise if I repeat things sometimes, but when things really strike me in these readings, I really want to take some time with them and just hover on them. So again, Thomas Merton, monk and Christian mystic, writer. Life is this simple. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and the divine is shining through it all the time. This is not just a nice story or a fable. It is true. This is a man who's seen. When he says this is true, this doesn't feel to me that this is true because someone's told him this is true. That the life, the world, is absolutely transparent and the divine is shining through it all the time. It's because he's seen it this way. He lives it this way. He knows it to be true without being taught it, without being told it. It's true. And I have to tell a small tale here, which is arising for me, which is I also have this experience of the world. This exact same experience. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent and the divine is shining through it all the time. This is not just a nice story or a fable. It's true. The very first time I came on silent retreat with Sri Muji, which was in May 2013, as a Zen Buddhist student and also as a trainee Zen teacher, I came and I sat it like I was on sesshin. I did zazen, I sat in the retreat, but I listened and I took his pointings to heart because I so fully wanted to discover my own true nature, to see clearly my true nature and the true nature of all things, which so far I'd begun to discover. But most of my understandings had come from books and from teachings and from intellectual understandings. Just like when somebody says, I know intellectually, but I don't really know. And I sat there, and I sat in the fire of satsang, and I felt the burn of that fire of satsang. Oh boy. And I sat it out, and I sat it out, and sat it out. And the body felt like it was shaking, it felt like I was sitting on a volcano, it felt like something was going to explode, and I sat it out. And through sitting it out, through not backing away, through just stepping into the fire, we're taught so often in these teachings, just throw everything in the fire, everything, don't leave anything out. I can't say that wholeheartedly enough. Let nothing remain, let nothing escape. Only then can you be sure. I gave everything. I dropped everything and just followed the pointing, stayed with it. A few things Guruji said were like darts. He spoke about a dart gun. And I felt a dart go in that afternoon. And at some point, my experience, how I was experiencing the world, completely changed. And how it changed was just as Thomas Merton is describing. And everything was radiant, everything became radiant. Everything still is radiant. This is where I start to run out of words. My words I described to Guruji was that I went to sleep that night. And I prayed that this new way of seeing, of perceiving, of experiencing the world was not a passing thing. That it wouldn't fade, that it wouldn't go away. And I went to sleep that night in my little tent at Zima. And I woke up in the morning. And I remember waking up pretty early. One eye, another eye. It's still there. Still there. How did I describe this? I described this as I woke up in the most beautiful temple, the most beautiful invisible temple. It's the only way I could describe this experiencing. This temple was this experiencing of the world in its divinity, the nature of its divinity, its true nature. The temple is invisible because there are no walls to see, but the divinity is the home. No wonder people say coming home. This temple was the home of this divinity. And wherever I looked, it was like this. It didn't matter if I was looking at a tent or a cafe or a person, the floor, baby bird, the ceiling, everywhere. I was in a temple. And this divinity everywhere, shining. And it's not an experience, it's an experiencing. And I described this to Guruji when I stood at the mic to ask him a question. And I described that I lived in this beautiful invisible temple. All of a sudden, couldn't quite believe the words that were coming out of my mouth at the time, but yet they came. And he had only one question for me, and that was, the one who dwells in this invisible temple, is this one visible or invisible? I didn't have to stop to think about the answer. The answer was clearly invisible. Invisible, the same as the temple. And if this one is invisible, the same as the temple, and everywhere is divine, and all around me is this divinity, wherever I look, then this one must be divine too. So no, Thomas Merton is right. Life is this simple. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and the divine is shining through it all the time. This is not just a nice story or a fable. It is true. In contemporary Western culture, back to Adyashanti's words, we have become illiterate in the language of myth. We've forgotten all about the truth myths can carry, the significance that they can transmit. In the modern age, most people understand myth simply as something that's not factually true. And that's a profound misunderstanding of myth. Myth isn't about factual or historical truth, but about a deeper truth. In ancient times, people saw myth in a very different light. As a vehicle that can transmit and carry a subtlety and richness of experience that simply cannot be conveyed by linear, conceptual forms of language. Let me just check the broadcast 1 second because we had problems with this system recently. We're still going, this is good. To get a sense of the limits of conceptual language, let me give you an example. I could, for instance, try to describe to you what an orange tastes like. I could tell you that it's sweet, that it has a tinge of sourness, that it's juicy, that the juice explodes in your mouth when you bite into it. I could tell you everything I know about an orange. But at the end of the day, even if I spend an hour describing the taste, you won't really know what an orange tastes like at all until you have bitten into one yourself. So even something as simple as the taste of a piece of fruit can't be conveyed through our linear way of speaking. Of course, the most powerful way of conveying it is through direct experience. And this is what spirituality is really all about. Evoking in you a direct experience of what the outer forms of spirituality are pointing towards. So whether it's prayer or contemplation, meditation, whether it's ritual, religious ritual, mantra, japa, offerings, all of these practices, sadhana, they aren't it. They aren't that which we're seeking. They're all this finger pointing to the moon that I talked about. But there is also a way of conveying, at a very deep and subtle level, truths, realities, and experiences that can't be expressed through logical and factual language. The language of myth is multivalenced, metaphorical, and elusive. It operates on many levels at once. In ancient times, people understood that myth and story can carry much more subtlety and richness of experience than mere facts. Today, much of this understanding has been lost. And this is really unfortunate, because it has cut us off from the richness that a mythic way of interpreting a story has to offer. Spiritual truths cannot be conveyed by facts. Facts are used for practical purposes. If your plane leaves at 3 o'clock from a certain airport, You need to know, or you will miss your plane. But when you're trying to convey deeper meaning, to convey the understanding that can come as a result of experiencing the sublime, you need a different mode of communicating. A different mode of communication. That mode of communication historically has been the myth, the story. So it's really important that we hear the Jesus story with the ears of myth and metaphor. In fact, many of the Christian mystics read the Jesus story very metaphorically, though it would have been dangerous at times for them to say this directly. They would have been called heretics for this also. It was through this great mythic reading that they gained access to the true gift of the story, which is the mystery of existence, the mystery of your existence, and the mystery of God's existence. I'm going to pause here.
Beloved, all that you perceive is transient, is passing. But you are the unchanging one, timeless and perfect. Rid yourself of all delusions and come lay down here in the silence of being. For unlike time, you are not passing. You are the formless within all forms, the silence and stillness inside all movements of time and manifestation. Arise into the fullness of your real nature as the unchanging self, the goal and source of all being. Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya.
Om Namah Shivaya. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Shri Satguru Jesus Christ Ki Jai. Om Shri Satguru Mujiji Ki Jai. Om Shri Satguru Anantaji Ki Jai. Sangha of Being. Ki Jai. So much love to you all. So much love. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me. It's my last reading, so far as I know, for this week. I'll be reading again on Wednesday, the same time. JJJ, yes, Nitya. If I feel or the opportunity arises to drop in and give some extra readings, I may just pick this book up and come and read some more next week. But the current schedule is Wednesday. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Om Namah Shivaya.